What is up, guys? Welcome back to day 2, round 2 of the Vasilis Theodoridis International Chess Tournament here in Kavala, Greece. My name is Titus Stromavicius. I'm a Grandmaster, and I want to share my experiences in games with you from the event. So I have the first round pairings and results on the screen right now, and as you can see, there were a lot of upsets in the round 1 games, at least at the top boards. Um, and both the first seed and the second seed failed to win their games, and the first seed actually even losing his game with the white pieces. So in round 2, I was actually lifted to board 1, already to play in the event against the Strycker Nathan from the Netherlands. He's a FIDE master. He's rated 2292. So I was a big rating favorite going into round 2 as well. But I did have the black pieces. And I was obviously still intending to try and win my game, go for a combative sort of setup. And I noticed that my opponent likes to play closed openings mostly. But I did notice that recently he's been playing more knight f3 setups. So for example, if I would go knight f6, c4, e6, he would prefer usually to play knight f3 first, avoiding the Nimzo-Indian, which would arise after bishop b4, knight c3. Or knight c3, bishop b4. So I kind of wanted to follow this trend that he's been sort of incorporating in the last few years. And I decided to, instead of my usual d5 move, to play knight f6 and try to lead him to this setup that he has been playing mostly in his recent years. And the reason I chose to do this was because otherwise my opponent could, of course, try to play the Carlsbad and take on d5. And in my experience and in my, I would say, recent games, like from maybe the last 5-6 years even, I think I have maybe like an 80% draw rate, maybe a 15% win rate, and a 5% loss rate in these positions, in this structure. So against a 2292 who I outrate about 250 points, that's not a very sort of exciting prospect, an 80% draw rate. So I wanted to avoid this, but my opponent obviously, he saw my games that I've never played the Nimzo-Indian in my life. He just, plays knight c3 basically instantly, and now I, of course, can't do anything else but play d5. And after cd5, ed5, we do arrive at the Carlsbad structure one way or another. But I have been looking at some more combative lines in the Carlsbad to try and, outplay my opponents. And the line I've been recently incorporating has been the Rajabov sort of setup, at least what is called is Rajabov Carlsbad in my notes, where black goes for, knight f8, g6, knight e6 type of setup. White usually goes f3, and then, all hell breaks loose. Most of the time with white even sometimes playing for a quick expansion on the king side. That's actually usually white's best idea, because e4 is usually somehow circumvented by tactics that black has. My opponent decides to first delay his castling and play f3 immediately, which I think is considered slightly inaccurate in this position, mostly because I can rush with my queenside expansion and play b5 immediately. So my opponent is heavily desensitized from castling long, and he has to castle short. And now I had a feeling that the move I played, which was knight f8, isn't the best move, but I just wanted to get the position that I know and I've looked at many times. Whereas I think maybe one of the best moves, or some of the best moves, require to play more on the queen side with a5, a6, for example, prepare c5, or bishop b7 even, to try to immediately develop the queen side. But I wanted to play knight f8 again to try and get a position that I've sort of looked at and was more familiar with. My opponent can't really do anything else than try to get the same positions that are considered the main line of this position, and has to go bishop h4. All doesn't have to, but it's probably one of the best moves in the position. And I try to go for g6, and again to try to get the same sort of position I've looked at. And now my opponent lashes out with a4. Now this move seemed completely ludicrous to me at first sight, and it is not a great move, because basically white and white's black to play b4, which is the only good move. And initially I couldn't find what was my opponent's idea. But of course, his idea is maybe I thought to try to get the knight like this to b3 and to set up some sort of a blockade. Of course, that's not really going to be a possibility because I have, due to my setup, a very good control of the c5 square. And I know no blockade is going to happen ever, and instead white actually loses quite a bit of time with this knight maneuver to redevelop it on b3. So knight e2, bishop b7. I was considering some other moves. I was considering some shabby tactics with like c5, let's say c5, dc, b3, you know, all of that jazz. Queen b3, bishop c5, and you know, try to target the e3 pawn. But I thought they were kind of unclear. Like even in this position, I wasn't sure. You know, like it just goes bishop f2. I take on e3. What's the evaluation? You know, d4 squares, sort of. Potentially, you know, for white to use it in the future. I don't really have any threats necessarily. I think my position is completely fine, but of course, maybe there were some other options that white could play in the process. So I decided to kind of play for a slower bishop b7 and try to just play rook c8 and c5, which I thought made more sense to just, you know, immediately undermine the queen and get all of my pieces basically into the game. Development is king most of the time, and it's really generally one of the best chess rules to follow is develop your pieces. And immediately my opponent sort of goes astray, and you know, again, my pieces are kind of well coordinated, well developed. My opponent plays e4, which just fails tactically, of course, after d, e, f, e, knight e4. My opponent did not seem surprised by knight e4, so he must have foreseen this and misevaluated it somehow. He plays a move I didn't see, bishop e1, to try and target the pawn on b4, which of course makes sense. And initially I was kind of a little bit upset because unfortunately for me knight g5 doesn't work because of bishop e4, rook e2. Nice tactical shot, it would appear, but queen e2, queen d4, queen f2 only move, of course, queen b4 and h4, and now the queen supports the pawn on h4, so I can't take, and also attacks on f7, and white is much better already, and it's a very one-sided affair. So I was a little bit upset that this didn't work, because I wanted to win the game as quickly as possible, obviously, as you should always want to do it, win as quickly as possible. But I decided to play knight f6 to cover the potentially soft f7 pawn, you know, so my opponent couldn't target it, and also the knight is very well protected on f6, so it cannot be really undermined, and also the knight could potentially come back to d5 and e3 or g4, e3, and maybe even h2, you know, at some point, creating threats there. My opponent takes the pawn on b4. I again was looking at some tactics with knight e6 and try to immediately attack the d4 pawn because it's actually quite hard for white to defend it properly. But I decided again just to stick to the main general principles. Development is king. I just got all my pieces into the game. Rook c8, and now my opponent had only one good move in this position, which was knight a6, kind of trying to lock up this bishop with knight c5, and a potential line could go like knight d7, knight c5, bishop c5, for example, dc, and knight d5. So the position is very complex, right? Like I have these weak and dark squares. My opponent has a dark square bishop, but I also have some thrones in the position. You know, the d5 outpost, the bishop on d3 is hanging, and then the bishop would come potentially with devastating effect through this diagonal if it were to get captured. And the position is, I think, according to the engine, slightly better for black, but still everything to play for both sides. Again, white has, you know, some nice ideas actually as well. Bishop h4 is important to note. So very, very complex position. I don't know if I would have even gone for this because this seems quite scary, you know, potentially on the dark squares, but that was the, I believe, the computer's suggestion. But instead, my opponent goes for the same idea, but with a different method, which is significantly worse because it exchanges the piece that would have been locked behind the pawn chain of c6, or behind the pawn rather. And now my pieces all sort of come to life. And it doesn't seem like the position is so bad for white, but in fact it's already completely winning for black, I would say. And I was evaluating as such. I thought the position was around 1.52 pawns according to the engine and for black, and that is exactly what it is. Yeah, queen b6 attacks the lone knight on a6. Again, white's main problem is the knight on a6 because it's so misplaced, and also obviously these weakened dark squares are also potentially could become a problem. I decided to play knight d5. My main idea is to provoke bishop f2, so now the rook doesn't look at f1 anymore, or f7 rather anymore. I thought, just to eliminate any sort of possibilities of counterplay, and also activate my piece, of course, at the same time. Two birds, one stone, as they say. Queen b2, rook b1, queen d2, rook fd1, queen g5. And now my opponent was kind of chasing my queen away, but he actually chased her right into where it wanted to be in the first place, and that's staring down the enemy king. Now, the knight on f4 can come at some point, and the game, I thought, should be over very soon. My opponent, to his credit, does find, I think, one of the most resilient ways to defend, which is queen b3. Basically, to bring his own queen back into defense. I decided again to follow the same principles that I've followed so far in this game, and this is to develop my pieces, activating them and creating threats. Bishop d6, queen f3, queen h6. And I thought my opponent didn't have any good moves here, because if he goes h3, which I thought was more or less forced, I can go maybe knight g5 and also immediately undermine the queen. The knight is still loose. My knight could potentially come to e4, and this should be game over very soon. But again, to my opponent's credit, he finds h4, which I did not see at all. And of course, it doesn't change the evaluation of position, but it sort of changes the psychological situation in my mind, at least. Because I thought the game should be over very quickly. Now my opponent actually is putting some defense, and I couldn't really find a good way to break through. The computer suggests the cold-blooded g5, I believe, just to go all in, which of course makes sense. If you told me this is the best move, I would completely believe you. But at the same time, you don't really want to play such a move during the game. So again, I just decided to sort of follow the same general guidelines I've been following the entire game. Again, just develop. Played rook e7. Also to take away the b7 square from the enemy rook, which was his, again, only active idea, so eliminating more counterplay for my opponent. Knight c5 finally brings the knight back into the game. I decided to go for knight ef4, basically to try and trade more pieces, and so my pawn advantage would start to feel more. And my opponent obviously should have taken on f4. I probably would have taken with the queen to get my queen out of the offside that it was in h6. And then we would probably play the second game. I would have taken with the, I think with the knight I was thinking of taking, and play this position, in which I'm pawn up, and it should be a technical win, but of course still, a lot of good moves have to be played before a full point is converted. Instead, my opponent plays knight g3, which is, again, kind of misplacing the knight and also keeping my active knight alive, which is just a bad concept and a bad move. And I decided to take, which was not necessary, but I decided to sort of trade more pieces. Rook c8, again, taking full control, activating, mobilizing my pieces, centralizing the rooks. And knight f1 was the final blunder sort of the game. Knight e2, king h2, knight ec3. And the game is more or less over because my opponent loses an exchange added to his pawn that he was already down. And there's not really much more to commentate. And queen f6, offering a trade of queens, and my opponent resigned. So 2 out of 2. Really sort of good first 2 round wins. I think my opponents didn't play the best, especially in the opening phase. I think they both kind of misplayed. But I still had to prove them wrong, sort of, so to speak. And I'm very, very satisfied with the first 2 games so far. Already I've played the round 3 game as well, which of course you can find online if you're curious. But that game's recap will be available probably tomorrow in the morning, because I still have a round 4 game today to play, so I kind of want to prep a little bit. But regardless, I'll see you all in round 3's recap tomorrow in the morning, and till then.